I was just going to say thanks. I unexpectedly learned a lot about selling today. One thing I don't understand or would like to learn more about is these first 6 engineers. You kind of, not really in the space, come with this crazy idea, say, hey, come and join my basement. And they're like at big companies. Like how, I understand big vision, but like how do you close these people?
How do you close these people? With great effort. And you have to find the special souls who will go do this. So I can tell some of the stories of the first couple employees. So there was, I think I mentioned earlier on that I had sort of done this like recursive search process. And the very first intro I got, I literally knew nobody in aerospace. And the best thing I had was a guy who had worked for me at Groupon had played hockey in college with a guy who now worked at SpaceX. And so I took that meeting, and the only cred I had was I could show up to the meeting in an airplane that I'd flown myself. And I asked him who he knew, and I got 5 names, and so I met those 5 people, and two of them now work at Boom, and the first one of those I think I met very, very early in this process, and as he tells the story now, he thought I was totally batshit crazy, and a year later I'd learned a lot. And I'd hired my chief engineer, and I went back and called him up and said, hey, I need a systems lead. And we talked again, and he's like, what happened to you over the last year? Because you know what you're talking about now. And so he was willing to make the leap. So he was employee number 2 after the founders. Our literal employee number 1 was somebody I started recruiting actually even before I found my co-founders. And it was clear from day one that the big challenge in all of this would be finding the propulsion system that could work. And so I sort of started working on that problem in parallel with recruiting. And I went on LinkedIn. This is a business that could not exist without LinkedIn. I found a lot of these people on LinkedIn. Right. So I found this guy who looked like he had an up-and-coming career at Pratt & Whitney.
What did you search for? Did you literally search for propulsion engineer?
Basically, yeah. I was looking at people who were mid-level in their careers, who might be innovative, and so I find this guy on LinkedIn, and I send him an email, and I'm like, hey, so I'm starting a supersonic jet company, and I know you guys make some jet engines, and I'd love to talk to you and see whether there's anything in your portfolio that could work for our airplane, and the guy took my call. And I think during his commute, and I explained to him what I thought the thrust requirements were for the engine and whatnot. And I think he thought I was a total crank, and he never called me back after that. But a couple months later, I get this text message from a number I don't recognize, and it says, "Hey, I'm in California. Do you want to meet up?" And I'm like, "Is this somebody I used to date? What is this?" And so I awkwardly reply, "Who is this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's Andy, the engine guy." and I read the biography of Elon Musk, and I decided I was done with Pratt & Whitney, and I want to go work on something new. And I actually just interviewed at SpaceX, and I think those guys are already those guys are no longer the thing you read about in the book. They've already passed that stage, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I said, well, if you want that, you should come work for me. And that was right around the time that I moved from Denver to Colorado, and so he. Sorry? Bay Area, Denver. Yeah, sorry. And so he flew out to Colorado, and he interviewed with me and my chief engineer in my basement. And eventually we convinced him to quit his executive career at Pratt to come work with us. And as he tells the story, as he's driving across the country, with all of his possessions in the U-Haul, he's like, crap, I really hope these guys aren't a front for the Chinese government who just who wanted this guy had owned half of the engine of the Joint Strike Fighter. And he's like, what if they just want to steal the Joint Strike Fighter technology and give it to somebody? Fortunately, that wasn't us.